A good vach, my holy sisters and brothers. Shavua Tov, a good week. And we are starting our week off right with some beautiful Torah learning on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we start our week off with some beautiful debate from Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. John Pittman in Lewiston, Maine. Melissa in Great Neck, PK in Colorado. Paula was loving the music. Bill, shalom from Columbia, Missouri, for a few minutes anyway. I'm afraid it's just about bedtime here. It must be 12:30 on the East Coast. Lost in admiration for everybody who's learning at past midnight. Awesome. And Bill says, how I look forward to autumn and winter Sabbaths. Yes, now we're on the way down in time. It's going to get earlier and earlier. Shabbat ends earlier and earlier. We're going to eventually establish a normal time for these Saturday night shows. Gerald in Tampa, Betzalel in Florida, Christo in Lubbock, Texas, Julie wishing us shalom and blessings, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago, and Francisco Rodriguez, great to see you live. Great to see you, Francisco. Oh, Bill is in Central Time in Missouri. Got it. Okay, let's do this. Tonight's show has a beautiful dedication from Michael and Jean Schechter. Michael and Jean say, or Jeannie, I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. This show is dedicated tonight, our learning is dedicated tonight for the healing of Marty Jaeger. He lost his wife of 64 years on April 1st and is now in treatment for a serious condition. He is a beautiful soul and loved by many. Marty, may you be comforted on the recent loss of your wife of 64 years. Wow, what a beautiful testament to marriage the two of you are. And may you experience a complete and speedy and, let's say, miraculous recovery from the condition that you're facing. We all wish you well. We pray for your healing. We all say Amen. And Michael and Jean, may you be blessed with unlimited blessings. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Where are we holding? This is Daf Chaf Dalet, so page 24 here in Tractate Sukkah. We're in chapter 2. This is the 7th volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Sukkot. We're in chapter 2, which primarily addresses how we fulfill our obligation to reside in the Sukkah during Sukkot. It's also touching on similar issues to chapter 1, which was about the requirements of the Sukkah itself. We picked this up at the bottom of the B side of page 23. Now, we've been discussing the 4th Mishna here in chapter 2, which generally talked about establishing a sukkah on top of a ship, which is allowed, or on a wagon, which is allowed. And then there's the issue of using a tree or a camel, which you can make a legitimate sukkah on top of a camel or in a tree or using the tree, but you can't use it on the first day of the festival or on Shabbos because you can't make use of an animal or make use of a tree by rabbinic decree on the first day of the festival. Then in the Gemara that we started to discuss yesterday, the idea came up of whether we can use an animal as one of the walls of a sukkah. So imagine you have 2 walls, only 2 walls of the sukkah. You need a third wall for it to be a fit sukkah. And let's say you had a cow standing nearby, just standing there, not doing anything, very docile cow. So if you brought it over and had it stand next to one of the walls so it forms the third wall, is it a legitimate sukkah? And one of the concerns that came up in that discussion is that the animal could wander off. Okay, so you tie it in place. But it could die. So what if the animal happens to die while it's standing there? Okay, so then it wouldn't be there during the whole festival. You need to prepare a sukkah that's capable of standing for all 7 days of the sukkah. And so that might invalidate the sukkah. And so then we got into a discussion between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir one of them is concerned that the animal could die during the week, the other one not. And part of the question there is, well, how common is it? How much of a concern does it need to be that this particular animal could die during the week of Sukkot? It's a pretty unlikely possibility. Yes, but there are other unlikely possibilities that we sometimes have to be concerned about. And so we got into a discussion of a priest who's married to a woman who's the daughter of a non-priest, and he's going away. And while he's away, he might die. And then she might, and then if they're childless and he has a brother, she might have to go through the ceremony of chalitza, which she might not want to do. And so he gives her a bill of divorce, conditional that if he dies, this bill of divorce would take effect 1 hour before his death. So at that point, instead of being a widow, she would actually be a divorcee, and she wouldn't have to deal with going through that ceremony with his surviving brother. And then, if having written that document, the question was, can she continue to eat teruma, which she can only eat the portion of the food set aside for priests and their families if she's married to a priest. But if she's actually divorced or widowed from the priest, then she can no longer eat that teruma. That's why it matters that she's the daughter of a non-priest. And so then the question came up, well, how concerned should we be that this guy could die? Do we stop her eating teruma as soon as he gives her that conditional bill of divorce? That's where we pick up the discussion. And the Gemara cites proof that these are the opinions of those Tanaim, right? So it says that Rabbi Meir is not concerned about potential death. He's not concerned that this priest could die at any moment, and therefore we stop her from eating teruma now. And Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that the priest could die at any moment, and we actually stop her from eating teruma now because we don't know if he's died or not. And so now the Gemara is going to bring a proof that these are in fact the positions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Meir is not concerned about death as something that could happen and we need to change a legal ruling in a situation because somebody could die at any moment, and Rabbi Yehuda is concerned. So as it is taught in a Baraisa, in the case of one who purchases wine from among the Samaritans, and there is reason to suspect that teruma and tithes were not taken, and he is not in a position to separate teruma, he acts as follows. So the idea here is the Samaritans were a group of people living in ancient Israel. They were actually brought into the northern kingdom when there were two kingdoms. After King Solomon died, there was actually a splitting of the kingdoms because his son was just not an effective king at all. And the northern kingdom seceded from the union, as it were, and created a new kingdom. And then there was parallel kingdoms. The northern kingdom was called the Kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom that included Jerusalem was called the Kingdom of Judea. And it's that northern kingdom that fell to Assyria. And when it fell, the tribes that lived there were exiled. That's why they're called the lost tribes of Israel. And then the king of Assyria brought in replacement people, as it were. And these were the Samaritans. And once they started living in the land of Israel, they weren't Jews at all, but they started having terrible problems because they were foreign people living in the land of Israel during its time of really heightened holiness. And they were, suffering from lions and plagues and all kinds of problems. And they decided, well, we better convert to Judaism and then we won't have these problems. But their conversion was essentially a conversion under duress. It wasn't something they really wanted to do. And they never fully bought into it. And one of the things that they didn't buy into was the authority of the rabbis, the authority of the sages. And so while they were kind of like outwardly practicing Jews, there was a lot of stuff that they didn't do, and so you couldn't rely on Samaritans with respect to Jewish law. And one of those areas was tithing. So you couldn't be sure that if you bought wine from a Samaritan that it had been tithed properly. right? So the tithes of any produce that requires tithing is the first 2% is teruma that goes to the priest, and the next 10% goes to the Levite. The next 10% of what's left, so essentially 9% of the original, you set aside for yourself in most years for you to make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem during the festivals, or in some years you set that aside for the poor. At any rate, you couldn't be sure that Samaritans had tithed their produce, so if you bought from them, you would have to tithe it. And that's the issue here. So what happens if you buy some wine from a Samaritan? Okay, so now you need to tithe it because of its uncertain status with regard to tithes. But you don't have a situation at that moment where you can take the tithe. So for example, with wine, you need containers, vessels that you can pour the tithe into, pour the amount of liquid into that you're going to need to store and set aside so that you can give to a priest and a Levite or to set aside for yourself later, but you don't have those vessels handy. So what do you do? For example, you have 100 lug of wine, so that's a volume, 100 lug of wine in the barrels. So the person says, 2 lug that I will separate in the future are teruma, that first 2%, as the mandated average measure of teruma is 1/50th. And then 10 lug are the first tithe, and a tenth of that remainder, which is 9 lug, are the second tithe. And he deconsecrates the second tithe that he will separate in the future, transferring its sanctity to money. So the second tithe, which you're going to use to go up to Jerusalem with you, you can sell it for money, and then you bind that money in your hand when you go on the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem, and it's your spending money while you're on the pilgrimage to celebrate Passover or Sukkot or Shavuos. You go up to Jerusalem, and you're going to be able to buy food while you're in Jerusalem and enjoy the festival. So you could actually deconsecrate that now, and set aside that money. That's something you can do right now, even though you can't set aside the amount of liquid that you need. And then he may drink wine immediately, relying on the separation that he will perform later, right? So he can't pour out that, approximately 21% of the wine now that's going to become his tithe. But what he's saying is, I'm setting aside 21% of this 100 lug of wine. Later, when I can, have the vessels handy and the measuring cups, I'm going to take the 21 lug and I'm going to put, part of it was set aside for money. So he's going to need 11 lug later set aside to become the 12 lug. 12. The 2 for teruma and the 10 for the first tithe. And he's going to measure that out later. But counting on the fact that he's going to measure it out later, he can start drinking this otherwise untithed wine now because he's going to tithe it later. Rabbi Meir says he can do this. Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon prohibit one from doing this process of saying, I will separate the tithe later so I can drink it now, due to the concern that the wineskin could burst and the contents spill before he has an opportunity to actually separate the teruma and tithes. In that case, when he drank the wine, retroactively he is found to have drunk untithed produce because the wineskin burst after he drank some, and he was never able to tithe it. So Rabbi Meir is not concerned about potential change in the status quo. He's not concerned that the wineskin might burst before he's able to do the tithes. And Rabbi Yehuda, who is concerned lest the wineskin burst, would all the more so be concerned about potential death. Tying it back to the issue at hand, Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that if you set an animal as the third wall of your sukkah, it could die, and so you can't use that procedure. And Rabbi Meir says you can, at least according to how we're reading their views with respect to the wineskin and tithing. So the Gemara suggests, so therefore maybe reverse the attribution of the statements according to Abaye. Rabbi Meir is concerned about potential death, and Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about potential death, as it is taught in a Baraisa. If one utilized his animal as a wall for his sukkah, Rabbi Meir deems it unfit, and Rabbi Yehuda deems it fit. Right, so they had a reversal of positions, and that's how we got to the place where we are now. Perhaps, right? But the Gemara asks, well, actually, this is difficult as there is a contradiction between the statement of Rabbi Meir with regard to the Sukkah, where he is concerned about potential death, and the other statement of Rabbi Meir with regard to the separation of Teruma and tithes, where he's not concerned that lest the wineskin burst. And the Gemara answers, well, Rabbi Meir could have said to you, death is common, as every living being will eventually die. However, the bursting of the wineskin is not common, because it is possible that he gave the wineskin to a guard for protection so that it does not burst until he has the opportunity to separate the required teruma and tithes. And the Gemara says, but this is difficult, as there is a contradiction between the statement of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to Sukkah, where he is not concerned that the animal could die, and the other statement of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to separation of teruma and tithes, where he is concerned that the wineskin could burst. So the Gemara suggests the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to tithes is not due to the fact that he is concerned about the potential bursting of the wineskin. Rather, he rules that one may not drink the wine because he is not of the opinion that there is a principle of retroactive clarification. So it's not so much that the wineskin could burst before you get to the time where you could tithe it later when you have measuring cups and vessels at your disposal, but rather some of the sages subscribe to this principle of retroactive clarification or retroactive designation, and some sages do not. So some sages will say, yeah, Rabbi Meir says, okay, so you can drink now by putting in your mind firmly that part of this wine is set aside and later you're going to have to take out that much, 11 log, as if you tithed it now and you had the measuring cups available. But other sages say, no, you can't do that. If you can't tithe it now, you can't drink it now. End of story. And so Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to the principle of retroactive clarification. The procedure prescribed by Rabbi Meir is based on a fundamental assumption that when the separation is actually performed, the produce that he separates for teruma and tithes at that point is determined retroactively to have been teruma and tithes from the outset. Rabbi Yehuda does not accept this principle. Therefore, one's subsequent actions do not retroactively determine the original status of the produce. And the Gemara asks, and is Rabbi Yehuda not concerned about the potential bursting of the wineskin? Is it true that it's only Rabbi Meir who's not concerned the wineskin could burst? What about Rabbi Yehuda's actual position on this matter? But isn't there proof from the fact that it teaches in the latter clause of the Baraisa that the sages said to Rabbi Meir with regard to tithes, do you not concede that perhaps the wineskin will burst and it will be determined retroactively that he is drinking untithed produce? And Rabbi Meir said to the sages, the possibility is not a concern. When it actually bursts, then I will be concerned. And this indicates by inference that Rabbi Yehuda, who disagrees with Rabbi Meir, is concerned about the potential bursting of the wineskin. So the Gemara answers that there it is Rabbi Yehuda who is saying to Rabbi Meir, for me, I am not of the opinion that there is a principle of retroactive clarification, and therefore one cannot separate teruma and tithes after drinking the wine. However, according to your opinion, that there is a principle of retroactive clarification, do you not concede that one may not drink wine before separating teruma and tithes due to the concern that the wineskin could burst? And Rabbi Meir said to him, when it actually bursts, then I will be concerned. That's a pretty good attitude about most things in life. I was just talking about with my daughter the other day. She was dreading, that a job she had to do would be really, really difficult. I said, listen, you don't know if that job is going to be difficult or not. If it is, okay, then you'll deal with it then. If it's not, then worrying about it now was like a double waste of time because there was nothing even to worry about. And if it is difficult, worrying about it now is not going to help you in any way anyway. So why worry? Right? And likewise, Rabbi Meir seems to have that attitude. It's very unlikely that the wineskin will burst, so I'm not going to be concerned about it. If the wineskin does burst, then I'll deal with it. The Gemara asks further, and is Rabbi Yehuda not concerned about potential death, like in the case of the animal dying as the wall of the sukkah, or in the case of the priest who gives his conditional bill of divorce to his wife? Didn't we learn in a Mishna, in Tractate Yoma, the last tractate we did about the laws of Yom Kippur, on the very first page, that the sages said with regard to the high priest prior to Yom Kippur, right? The tractate Yoma opened with 1 week before Yom Kippur. They take the high priest out of his home and put him in a special room in the holy temple, so that he would not have any possibility of becoming tameh. He would not be exposed to, for example, coming into contact with a corpse or any other source of impurity. And since it says in the Torah that the high priest on Yom Kippur will make an atonement for himself and his house, and the sages understand that when it says about a man and his house, it means a man and his wife, right? Because the whole identity of a person's home is set by the mom, or it's set by the wife. So he has to be married in order to be the serving high priest on Yom Kippur. Well, what if his wife dies before Yom Kippur, or even, God forbid, on Yom Kippur? So they have a backup wife designated so that, God forbid, she dies, his wife dies, right, during this week before Yom Kippur or even on Yom Kippur. There's another woman ready to step in, marry him instantly, and become his wife, so that while he's officiating as the high priest on Yom Kippur, he'll be married, which is required. And so they would designate another priest so 1 week prior to Yom Kippur, they would designate another priest in his stead as the backup high priest in case the high priest dies. And they would designate another, and because, And they would designate another priest in his stead, and because the high priest performing the Yom Kippur service must be married, Rabbi Yehuda says they would even designate another wife for him, lest his wife die. Apparently, he is concerned about potential death. Rabbi Yehuda has this concern that someone could die. And the Gemara answers, but wasn't it stated with regard to that Mishna that this designation of the backup wife is unique to Yom Kippur? As Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said, they established a higher standard with regard to the atonement of Yom Kippur. Therefore, matters that are not a source of concern in other areas of law might be significant with regard to Yom Kippur, but that doesn't mean that we learn out from that in other areas we have to be concerned. I mean, it's the highest standard. We have to take the most precaution when we're talking about the high priest who's going to make an atonement on behalf of the whole nation, as well as himself and his wife. We're going to be super cautious. But with regard to, this concern that a person could die at any moment, or the wineskin could burst, or that the animal serving as a wall for the sukkah could die, maybe we don't need to be concerned. So the Gemara asks, both according to the one who said that an animal is an unfit partition due to the concern that it could die, and according to the one who said that it is unfit due to the concern that it could flee, it could walk away, apparently it is a full-fledged partition by Torah law, and it is the sages who issued a decree prohibiting its use, lest this problem arise. Right? In both cases, the animal, it works as a partition. The animal could serve as a wall. It's not that an animal is an unfit wall. The problem is that it could die or wander off, not that it's an unfit wall from the get-go. However, if that is so, according to Rabbi Meir, an animal used as a covering for a grave should be impure due to the impurity of the covering of a grave. So now they're going to look at yet another area of law where Rabbi Meir issued a ruling to try to understand sort of what is his philosophical approach to using animals in places where normally we would use an inanimate object, right? So here you have to cover, let's say you put a person, there's a corpse, you're going to bury it, there's a hole in the ground, but let's say it's a hole in a rock, and for some reason there's no dirt available where you're going to put him. There were caves that were graves, and for whatever reason there's no dirt that you could use as the covering of the grave. Could you temporarily use a living animal as the covering of a grave, right? That was a question that's asked in another area of law. If one and let's just do the halacha right away. If one uses an animal as a covering of a grave, an untethered animal is not considered a covering of a grave since it could wander off. If it is tethered, if it is tied there so that it is in place and used as a covering of a grave, one who comes into contact with that animal is impure with the impurity imparted by a corpse, like one who comes into contact with any other covering of a grave, right? If you walk over a grave when the temple is standing, and this really matters, you become tameh, and you're going to have to go through a purification process so that you become tahor again and are fit to enter the temple compound. So normally you can't contract. Let me continue. After the animal is freed from the tether, its legal status is like that of any other animal, and it is pure, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishna. So according to Rabbi Meir, an animal used as a covering for a grave should be impure due to the impurity of the covering of a grave. Why then did we learn in a Mishnah in Tractate Eruvin that Rabbi Yehuda says, even a living creature imparts ritual impurity due to the impurity of the covering of a grave, but Rabbi Meir deems it pure? If, according to Rabbi Meir, an animal is unfit for use as a partition only due to the concern that it could die or flee, but essentially it is a fit partition, why does it not become impure when used as a covering of a grave? So we must be misunderstanding Rabbi Meir's position about whether an animal can be used as a partition and what the reason for that is. So rather, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, contrary to that which was stated above, Rabbi Meir holds that any partition that stands by means of air, in other words, by intangible means, like an animate being which stands due to its own volition, its own life force, is not a partition. So it would seem that an animal should not be a fit partition according to Rabbi Meir. And some say a different version of that which Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, that Rabbi Meir holds that any partition that is not established by a person is not a partition. But then you could say, well, the animal maybe in itself is not a fit partition, but if a person brings it here and ties it in that spot, now it has been arranged by a person and it should be a fit partition. Perhaps. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the two versions of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's statement? And the Gemara answers, there is a practical difference between them in the case where one establishes a partition with an inflated wineskin. According to the one who said that a partition that stands by means of air is not a partition, this partition also stands by means of air and is therefore unfit. And according to the one who said that if it is not established by a person, it is not a partition, this partition was established by a person and is therefore fit. And in fact, this idea that something that is held aloft by means of air, it's more of a metaphor than actually meaning that a balloon would not work. Air just means it's there of its own will. A person didn't establish it. The master said in the Baraisa that in the name of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, they said, nor may one write bills of divorce on it. And the Gemara asks, what is the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili? Right. So this was back, again, we were giving several examples. Just going back a little bit to page 23, if one utilized his animal as a wall for a sukkah, and he did not establish the entire sukkah on top of the animal, right? So this case that we're talking about, if you used an animal as the wall of a sukkah. Okay, so Rabbi Meir said no good. Rabbi Yehuda said it is okay. Why? Rabbi Meir would say with regard to any animate object, one may neither establish it as a wall for the sukkah nor as a side post placed at the entrance of an alleyway to render permitted to carry there, nor as one of the upright boards placed around the wells to render the area a private domain and permit one to draw water from the well on Shabbos, nor as the covering of a grave. And in the name of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, the sages said, nor may one write bills of divorce on it, on the animal. And then so the Gemara went into, and that's how we got to this discussion, what is the opinion of Rabbi Meir? Right, so as Rabbi Meir said, you cannot use an animal as the wall of a sukkah. Why? Was he concerned that it could die? Well, that seems pretty unlikely, and we saw that Rabbi Meir is not concerned that a wineskin could burst before you actually get around to tithing it. Is that the animal could wander off? Maybe that's his reason, because as we're seeing now, Rabbi Meir does not like things that are there of their own volition and not established by a person, or at least continuing. It's not established in a fixed way by a person. So as part of that discussion, we had this idea that you also can't write a bill of divorce, a get, right? So when in a traditional Jewish bill of divorce means that a husband writes out this bill of divorce, gives it to the wife, and when he hands her that scroll with the language on it that says we're now divorced, there's a specific formula for that, then they're divorced. And until he gets that scroll into her hands, they're not divorced. So then the question that's being asked now is, can you write the bill of divorce rather than on a parchment or a scroll on some kind of a piece of paper, or even a hide, an animal hide? Can you actually write it on a living animal? That's the question being asked. And it seems that most of the sages said no. So what is the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili? It is as taught in a baraisa with regard to the verse, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it comes to pass, if she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found something unseemly in her, that he write her a scroll, a sefer of severance, and give it in her hand, and then they break apart. That's Deuteronomy 24:1. From the word scroll, I have derived only that a scroll is fit, some kind of paper. From where do I derive to include all objects as fit materials upon which a bill of divorce may be written? Well, the verse states that he write her. In any case, any surface upon which the formula can be written. Well, if so, what is the meaning of that which the verse states, scroll? It is to tell you that a bill of divorce must be written on a surface like a scroll. Just as a scroll is neither alive nor is it food, so too a bill of divorce may be written on any object that is neither alive nor food. And that is why Rabbi Yosei HaGalili invalidates a bill of divorce that is written on a living creature. And the Gemara asks, well, how do the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yosei HaGalili and say that a bill of divorce may be written on a living creature or on food, how do they interpret this verse? So the rabbis say, if the verse had written that he write for her in the scroll, ba-sefer, then it would be, as you said, that the bill of divorce may be written only on a scroll. However, the verse is written simply that he write her a sefer. And it comes to teach that a mere account of the matters, sefirat devarim, is required. In other words, he has to write the correct formula for divorce, and it doesn't matter what he writes it on. There are no restrictions with regard to the surface on which that account may be written. And the Gemara continues, and what do the rabbis derive from the phrase that he write her, which is from where Rabbi Yosei HaGalili derives certain requirements. And the Gemara answers, that phrase is required to teach the principle that a woman is divorced only by means of writing, i.e. a bill of divorce, and she is not divorced by means of money. Because when a couple becomes betrothed, there has to be an exchange of something for value, right? I betroth you unto me under the laws of Moshe and Israel, and then they're betrothed, and they're real, and now they're already separated from the rest of the world. They're promised to each other, and they can't go and marry anyone else. And you can do that with an exchange of some kind of an object that has value, including money. But for a divorce, even though he's going to have to pay her a divorce settlement, which, by the way, was revolutionary in the history of humankind, there had never been a law protecting women this much as when the Torah came and said, you can't just kick a woman out of your house. If you divorce her, you're going to owe her the money that's required by the Torah in a bill of divorce. So could he just give her the money and then say, okay, we're divorced? No, he has to hand her that bill of divorce that she will always have, that paper. And when people say, wait a minute, that's not a single woman. I saw her married to so-and-so. I was at the wedding. And she could say, here's my get. Here is my bill of divorce. I am a single woman. I am free to remarry. That's necessary for her, right? In ancient times, a man could have multiple wives. A woman could not have multiple husbands, right? So he didn't have to prove that he's single in order to get married, but a woman would have to prove that if she'd been married before, that she had then become divorced in order to marry again. Right? And so you can't do it by means of money. You have to write her the get. So it might have entered your mind to say, since in the verse leaving marriage, in other words, divorce, that phrase is juxtaposed to becoming married, i.e. betrothal, then just as becoming married is affected with money, so too leaving marriage may be affected with money. Therefore, the Torah teaches us he must write her, indicating that divorce can be effected only with a written bill of divorce. And the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, from where does he derive this reasoning that a woman cannot be divorced with money? And the Gemara answers, he derives it from the phrase, a scroll of severance, which teaches that a scroll, i.e. a written document, severs her from her husband and nothing else severs her from him. And the Gemara continues, okay, and when the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, they require that verse to teach that a bill of divorce must be a matter that severs all connection between him and her. As it is taught in a baraisa, if a man says to his wife, this is your bill of divorce on the condition that you will never drink wine, or on the condition that you will never go to your father's house, that is not severance. The divorce is not valid. If a bill of divorce imposes a condition upon the woman that permanently binds her to her husband, her relationship with her husband has not been completely severed, which is a prerequisite for divorce. If, however, it's a temporary condition, like this is your bill of divorce on condition that you don't drink wine for 30 days, okay, so she can abstain from wine for 30 days, and then they are divorced. It's permanent. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 2. Now we're going to read the short Mishnah, that is Mishnah number 5, just begin the discussion and then go to questions and comments. So if you've got questions and comments, please get them in now. That's Mishnah number 5. In the case of one who establishes his sukkah between the trees, and the trees serve as walls for it, the sukkah is fit. That is the whole Mishnah. So can you use a tree as the wall of a sukkah? Now we've seen that there's a problem with if one of those if a tree forms one of the walls of the sukkah, and without that wall, it is not a fit sukkah. In other words, there's 2 walls and a tree as the third wall. It's a problem because you can't make use of a tree on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So this will be a fit sukkah, but you can't use it as your sukkah on the first day of the festival, nor on Shabbos during Sukkot. That's the Mishnah. Gemara. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, any partition that is not able to stand in a typical wind, but rather is blown to and fro, is not a partition. Right? So we know that the sukkah has to be able to stand up to a typical wind by land, which is less wind than a typical wind by sea, and not blow over. Okay, but now it's a little bit different. Now this rule from Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is that in a typical wind, the wall needs to be there. Not just not blow over, but not sway back and forth. And if it does sway back and forth, it's not going to be a fit partition. And the Gemara asked the following question based on that which we learned in the Mishnah. In the case of one who establishes his sukkah between the trees, and the trees serve as walls for it, the sukkah is fit. And so the Gemara asks, but don't trees sway back and forth in the wind? So the Gemara says, with what are we dealing here? The Mishnah is referring to older trees that are thick and hard and do not sway in the wind. The Gemara says, but isn't there the issue of the foliage, the branches and leaves, which certainly sway in the wind? It constitutes part of the wall of the sukkah should be unfit. And the Gemara answers, it is referring to a case where it is a fit wall due to the fact that he established the wall by tying it with hard palm leaves and laurel leaves to tighten it, to prevent it from swaying in the wind. And the Gemara says, if it is so that the tree is tied and cannot sway, well, what purpose is there to state this halakha? It is obvious that it is a fit wall. And the Gemara answers, it is stated, lest you say, let us issue a decree prohibiting its use, lest one come to use the tree on Shabbos. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that this is not a concern. right? You can't use this sukkah on Shabbos or on the first day of the festival. Nevertheless, it is still a fit sukkah as long as that foliage is tied down so that it is not swaying in the wind, according to this Gemara. And what is the law? Where does it eventually come out on this issue? If one established his sukkah among the trees such that the trees serve as walls of the sukkah, and the tree branches are sturdy or tied in a manner that prevents them from swaying to and fro in the wind, the sukkah is fit. Therefore, one should not use fabric as walls for the sukkah, as even if it is tied tightly, there is concern that nevertheless it will sway in the wind. A partition that is not able to stand in the wind, any partition that cannot stand in a typical wind is not a partition. Therefore, if one seeks to use a tree as a partition for the purposes of the halachas of Shabbos, he may tie the branches in such a way that they will not sway to and fro in the wind. It's interesting that it says, therefore one should not use fabric as walls for the sukkah, as even if it is tied tightly, there is concern that it will nevertheless sway in the wind, because people definitely do use fabric as walls of a sukkah. It's tied all the way around, all four sides, top, bottom, and the sides at each wall, the corner posts, and so it won't sway. So, definitely people do that, and there are definitely kosher sukkahs sold in, very Haredi from stores, and these are sukkahs. So I'm not sure why that halakha is stated that way, but perhaps we should remember that if the fabric is in any way untethered and it could really just sway back and forth in the wind, that's no good for a sukkah. It really has to be so it won't sway in the wind. Okay, let's see if there's any comments or questions. I know it's late on a Saturday night. Michael Stein. How about if the animal defecates? That would be teruma. They have not addressed the fact that the animal's bodily functions will be, that the animal have bodily functions. I mean, I'm not sure what you're saying that the poop of the cow would be teruma. We're not concerned about, in terms of tithing, right, that you have to set aside, that you have to set aside the teruma of, let's say, wine that was untithed. But the idea, I think what you're saying is, are we concerned about this eventuality, that the animal could poop and that therefore that it would disqualify it as a fit partition? I think the only issue there would be that it's disgraceful, right? It's just in the same way that you don't pray near a toilet, you don't pray in the presence of poop on the ground. If you don't say a blessing in the presence of poop on the ground, you have to face away from it or go a certain distance from it. So if this animal being used as a partition of a sukkah were to defecate, wouldn't that maybe render the sukkah unfit? Because the whole idea of dwelling in the sukkah is so that we can make the blessing, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to dwell in the sukkah. And then you would say a blessing on the food you're going to eat there and eat it. But you couldn't do that in the presence of the poop. I guess the idea would be that you arrange the animal to be the wall of the sukkah, but that its hindquarters would be sort of beyond the other wall, right? If it's acting as the third wall, you only really need one handbreadth of the animal to be, in the place of the wall, and you could locate its hindquarters well away from that corner post. And I guess I'm sure that's what you would want to do, in case of that issue. Yosef, as it relates to Rabbi Meir, if he is the most often cited rabbi in the Mishna, does that mean that his words are most authoritative? Yes and no. So Rabbi Meir is the one principally responsible for the final formulation of the Mishnayos, right? The way every Mishnah is worded is often sort of Rabbi Meir was the one who finally set it up with that wording. However, Rabbi Meir himself, had different rulings. Sometimes he was with the majority, sometimes he was in the minority, and it's definitely not the case that whenever Rabbi Meir says something, we follow his ruling. In certain disputes, we follow Rabbi Meir over others, and others we don't. And Rabbi Meir got himself in trouble, right? I think it was with Rabban Gamliel, because he took a sort of political position with regard to the succession of the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, and that got him in trouble, and so his name was removed from certain Mishnas, not all of them, but certain Mishnas. And so that's why when it says Acherim say, others say, that's actually code for Rabbi Meir says, but it's like he got punished and had his name removed from certain Mishnas. So generally speaking, Rabbi Meir is very authoritative, and we give him credit for coming up with the formulation of the Mishnas, where even he might have the minority opinion, but the way that it's worded is sort of his writing. But we're not going to think of him as the most authoritative, authority on Jewish law. And finally, Bill. Now, what happens if an unwise drinker overindulges and accidentally drinks too much? One assumes that the burst wineskin is an accident, but perhaps his intemperance would be regarded differently. Right, so great question. So the idea was he has 100 lug of wine. He says to himself, okay, 11 of these I'm not going to drink. None of us are going to drink it because I have to set that aside later as the tithe and the teruma. But then they get carried away. They're having a party. They keep drinking it, and they end up drinking the whole thing. Now, retroactively, it has been clarified that these people drank untithed produce. So at that point, they would have to deal with the penalty of drinking untithed produce. That's an avera. That's a sin. It's a transgression. And so I think they're going to end up in the same situation as somebody who simply drank untithed produce from the beginning. So great question. Okay, that's what I've got for us this evening. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific. Just a little bit of a... giving you the heads up what's coming. This week we'll have normal class Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then Thursday I am traveling. I'm going to go see my parents in Florida. And then I'm trying out to make a Team USA for the Maccabiah Games in 2022. The tryouts are this summer for the Masters golf team. And it is my little dream that I make the team. And then get an opportunity to address Team USA when we're in Israel. I was a member of Team USA as a rower in 1985. It was my first visit to Israel. It was very moving. It was a great trip. But I didn't come away from that trip really connected to Torah and to Judaism. That would come later for me. And I feel that if I have an opportunity to speak to the young athletes, many of whom are secular Jews like I was in 1985, maybe I can, tell them a story, my story, and be inspirational and be moving and get some people to, at least open themselves up and give a try to learning a little Torah, maybe even a little Talmud. And perhaps they might connect with Judaism earlier in their life than they otherwise would, or might connect and they otherwise wouldn't at all. So I really am praying that I make that team. I've been working hard, training hard. My golf game is good, but it needs to be great in order to make the team. So anyway, those tryouts are going to be the following week. So my point is that come next Thursday, I'm going to be traveling, and then I'll be absent for a week, and we won't have class for about a week until the following Friday. And so it'll be like we did the last time when our family was on vacation. We'll go on our own. And then when I get back, I'll do a recap show with highlights of the missed material from the week I was away. I'll keep up my reading while I'm away, and maybe I'll just post, some thoughts from the day's pages. But I won't have the ability to do, this video class on both Facebook and YouTube while I'm traveling. So I might do just a post about some thoughts, but there won't be class from Thursday until the following Friday. So just a look ahead of what's coming. Okay, my friends, have a terrific week, a Shavua Tov, a good Vach, and it's great to be learning with you this Saturday night. All the best.